Hey everyone, I am Nate and welcome back to Hype Up. It's now time for another top 10 list. In today's video, we are going to be having a look at the top 10 scariest campfire stories of all time. In at number 10 is The Ghostly Maid. A boy and his father decided that they were going to move to a new house, new town, after they had lost their wife and mother. When moving into the new house, the neighbors warned them that the place was haunted, and many who had moved in before had moved out not long after because of ghost sightings. Neither of them believed in ghosts, so they moved in without an issue. While unpacking their boxes, the boy became thirsty and hungry, so went downstairs. The child asked the maid of the house if he could have some water and a snack. The maid smiled and got him what he had asked. They sat there and chatted for a while, during which the maid talked about some of the stories about the old house and that it might actually be haunted. Later in the evening, while sitting down to dinner, he mentioned the conversation to his father, saying that the maid was very convincing with some of the stories they were telling him. Shocked, the father quickly stood up and said, "Son, we don't have a maid." In at number 9 is Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan woke up in a park as it had started raining heavily. He quickly tried to find cover underneath a big oak tree in the park. Once under cover, Mr. Sullivan realized that he had a splitting headache. He looked around and noticed that there was someone else standing underneath another tree. He wanted to see if they had some medicine for his headache, so he ran over to them through the rain. As he started to get closer, they locked eyes. They had a terrifying look on their face as they turned and started running in the opposite direction. Confused, Mr. Sullivan thought that they were weird and decided to leave the park to go to the shops. As he left, the people hiding under the roofs of nearby buildings started running at the sight of him. Confused still, he tries to catch them to work out what in the world is going on. As he approaches the shops, he catches his reflection in the glass window. He is a ghost, and it looks like he had been struck by lightning. How terrifying of a story is that? Woke up in a park with a headache and was just like, oh God, oh, it's raining. I gotta get out of the rain. In at number 8 is The Vanishing Hitchhiker. The story goes that a man was driving from one town to another late at night when he notices a hitchhiker standing on the side of the road. She waves him down and he pulls over to pick her up. The girl mentions that she is a 30-minute drive down the road and would be super thankful if they dropped her off. He agrees. They have a pleasant conversation and the time flies by. The guy drops the girl off at the house and continues home. The next morning, he notices that the girl has left her jumper in the car. He decides to drop it off at the house because of how nice the girl was. He pulls up in the driveway and knocks on the door. An elderly woman answers. He says, "I dropped your daughter off last night and she left her jumper in my car." Shocked, the woman says that is impossible, as her daughter had died 30 years ago while hitchhiking. In at number 7 is The Backseat Driver. A girl is driving home from one town to the other to spend the holidays with her family. As she leaves the town and starts driving on the highway, she notices a pair of headlights in her rear vision mirror and they're approaching fast. The car gets closer and closer and it starts to worry her. She changes lanes to allow the car to go around, but they don't. They continue to get closer and closer. Not only are they dangerously close, but they're also flashing their headlights periodically. She becomes more and more worried as this goes on, and she finds it increasingly hard to keep focus on the road. She quickly takes the next available exit, pulls into a restaurant car park, gets out of the car and starts running. The person behind her pulls in directly right where her car is and gets out of the car. They yell as she runs, "Get inside, lock the door and call the police." She runs inside and does just that. As she turns to look outside of the building, she sees someone else getting out of her car and they start running away with a knife. The person behind them had been trying to warn the girl and was flashing their headlights every time the person in the back seat raised the knife. In at number 6 is Hide and Seek. Two young brothers were home alone as their parents visited their neighbors as they were unwell. To keep themselves entertained, the boys decided that they would play hide and seek. The older brother turned to face the wall and counted to 100 while the younger brother hid. After reaching 100, the boy started to search. He checked all of the usual spots, the bed, behind the sofa, and behind the curtains, but couldn't find his younger brother. he started to get worried and started calling out for him. He then heard a scraping sound coming from the closet. He flung open the doors and said, "Found you!" But no one was there. Confused, the brother searched through the coats when suddenly an icy cold white hand grabbed him and started to pull him in. He tries to free himself as he hears another voice from behind him. It's his brother, looking shocked. They both fight together and free the older brother from the thing that was trying to drag them in. Who knows what would have happened if he was pulled inside. In at number 5 is The Hook. This tale is a classic one that has been parodied in many other TV shows like The Simpsons. The story goes that a young couple wanted some alone time to themselves, so they went for a drive to a lookout just outside of town. They get to their destination and turn the radio on to listen to some music. Suddenly, a warning over the radio is heard. The announcement is talking about a patient that has escaped from a mental asylum who has a hook for a hand. The boy doesn't worry about it, but the girl is and tells him to take her home immediately. She finally convinces him and he starts the car. As he is reversing, they hear a scraping sound. The boy drives off, not too worried about the sound as he thinks he might have reversed into a bush. They finally get to the girl's house. She opens the door and hears something hit the driveway. Startled, she turns to see what it was that had hit the ground. It was a hook. In at number 4 is The Watchful Paintings. One day, a man had set out to do some hiking in a nearby forest. While walking through the forest, he became confused as to where he had come from, as the forest seemed like a maze. As it started to get darker, the hiker knew that he had to try and find some shelter, as it was going to be a long, cold night. Walking for another hour or so, the hiker found a cabin that he could stay the night in. The hiker entered the dark cabin and noticed that there were paintings all over the cabin walls. Even weirder, the eyes of the paintings looked like they were following him as he moved throughout the cabin. The hiker decided that he'd ignore it and went to sleep. The next morning, the hiker woke to notice the paintings were gone and there were only windows. In at number 3 is Behind the Tombstone. There were 2 brothers who were ghost hunters, who would follow rumors that they had heard around the country to try and find and record any ghost to try and become famous. They tried to enter one in particular before, but the caretaker had told them that no one was allowed to enter at night. Later, they jumped the fence of the graveyard, deciding to ignore the caretaker. They started filming and walking through the graveyard when they heard some scratching noises coming from behind a tombstone. "Is there anyone with us tonight?" they asked. There was nothing but scratching. "What is your name?" More scratching. "Can you show yourself?" The scratching continued. "Are you afraid of us?" The scratching stopped. Neither of them had realized the darkness that had spread around their ankles. It suddenly engulfed them, blinding them with darkness, and then they vanished. The next morning, the caretaker found the camera while doing the rounds of the graveyard. They played the video. On the playback, someone or something was answering the questions that the 2 guys were asking. "Yes, I am here. My name is never spoken by your kind, but it is very old. I'll show myself, but it is the last thing you'll ever see. You are mine." The caretaker carefully pocketed the recorder and took it to the shed, where he put it on a pile with the others. In at number 2 is The Hotel Room. There was a man who checked into his hotel. While walking to his room, he noticed a door without a number at the end of the hall, and it didn't have a card reader, but a keyhole. Curious, the man checked out the room by looking into the keyhole. He saw a woman with long white hair and a white dress standing in the corner facing away for him. Unfussed, he walked back to his hotel room. Later that night, he went back as he was still curious. Peeking through the keyhole, all he could see was that something bright red was in the way, leaning up against the door. He thought that they might have noticed. Embarrassed, he left. The next morning, he asked the staff while leaving about the room with the keyhole. The girl behind the counter said, "Oh, a bride had died in that room on the day of her wedding mysteriously, so we've just locked it up. She's very hard to forget though. She had long white hair and bright red eyes. Yeah. Before we reveal what number 1 is, what have you thought of the list so far? Have you heard of any of these stories? Do you have any ghost or scary campfire stories that you know yourselves? Let us know in the comment section down below, but it is now time for number 1. In at number 1 for the scariest campfire story is the clown statue. If you have a fear of clowns, then this isn't the tale for you. A teenage girl would babysit 2 kids from a wealthy family in the neighborhood. Each time she did, she was instructed to watch TV in the basement and to not go wandering throughout the house. One night, the kids go to sleep and the girl makes her way into the basement as instructed to continue watching TV, but is having trouble focusing because of a clown statue that is in the corner grinning. She throws a sheet over the clown in hopes of making it easier to focus. It doesn't. She calls the father asking if she can go back to another room and that she promises she won't wake the kids. Explaining the situation to the father, he quickly tells her to leave the house. He continues saying that the children have been complaining about a clown, but he thought it was just a nightmare. She quickly turns to see that the sheet is on the floor and hears the creaking of stairs out of the basement. Did you enjoy the video? If you did, make sure you like, subscribe, and check out these other videos over here. I'm Nate, this is Hype Hub, and we'll see you all next time.